Chancellor, thanks very much for doing this. We've had the GDP news today. There's obviously a lot of factors, global factors, creating uncertainty for the economy, but we have also created some of our own in the UK. And the debate about the Northern Ireland Protocol is obviously casting a shadow. Have you analysed at the Treasury what the economic implications of tearing up the protocol will be?
I think, first of all, on the protocol, I think the government's position is that as it's currently operating, it poses enormous challenges to the stability of the situation in Northern Ireland. You can see it's become a barrier to re-establishing power sharing in Northern Ireland, doesn't have cross-community consent. And that's a very serious situation that needs resolving. Our preference is to have, and always has been, to have a negotiated settlement with our European friends and partners, and no decision has been taken about what the future direction might be. And with regard to your second question, look, of course, that's my job, to provide the Prime Minister and the government with analysis on policy regarding the economy. And you'd expect me to do that on everything, and of course we do. And we're constantly monitoring everything that's going on and analysing that as we go.
But we understand that you could get legislation next week to make it possible to tear up the protocol, and that seems to be what the Foreign Secretary is supporting. Are you lobbying hard on behalf of the economy to prevent that?
I think it's important people know that no decision has been taken. Our preference has always been to have a negotiated settlement. I know the Foreign Secretary continues to engage with her counterparts in Europe about how we can find resolution to some of the very real challenges that the protocol is causing, not least being a barrier to resuming power sharing in Northern Ireland, which is something that we all want to see.
Well, and you said that it's the Treasury's job to analyse these things. When the protocol was signed, it was very clear that these checks were going to happen, that there would be this kind of impediment to trade. So that's something that's no surprise at all.
I think when it comes to the protocol, we have to recognise that there's a unique situation in Northern Ireland, and everyone acknowledged that at the time, and it required a degree of flexibility and a constructive attitude on all sides to recognise the particular circumstances of Northern Ireland to come up with a solution that would work. Now, the protocol could, exactly, and I think what we need to see is a degree of flexibility and a constructive attitude to try and resolve some practical problems on the ground. And I'm hopeful that continued dialogue and negotiation can resolve the situation and result in a negotiated outcome.
Just we'll get on in a minute, but when you're weighing up the impact on the economy as a Chancellor, it seems clear that you would be pushing for the continuation of the protocol rather than throwing all of our trade relationship into uncertainty.
Well, it's important to me, as it is important to the government, that we also protect the Good Friday Agreement, that we resume power sharing in Northern Ireland, that we make sure that Northern Ireland's place in the Union, in the United Kingdom, is secure. And it's clear that the protocol, as it's currently operating, is causing harm on all those things, and that's why we remain committed to trying to find a resolution on that. It's a serious situation, and that's something that across government we all feel.
And on Ukraine, which is of course the other thing which is thrown away or caused you to tear up a lot of plans in the last few months, the Prime Minister has now committed us to defending Sweden and Finland in the event of a Russian attack. We're the first country to do that. Surely at this point, you should be tearing up your future defence plans just like most of the other economies in the world. You're going to have to spend more, aren't you?
Well, I think unlike most of those other economies that you mentioned, we are already one of the leading spenders on defence, and we already took the decision to increase defence spending. I think a decision that looks actually prescient
before
now.
The invasion. And, you don't think you're going to have to revisit that?
Hang on. We also increased defence spending alongside publishing something called the Integrated Review, which happens periodically, which analyses the threats to our security and then decides on the right approach going forward. And actually, if you go and read that, it's very clear that one of the biggest state threat to us was Russia. So the strategy that we had outlined already considered the notion that Russia was a big threat, and alongside that strategy, we announced a historic uplift in defence spending, the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. It's worth £24 billion over the period of the settlement, and it means that we are the second largest defence spender in NATO, largest in Europe, one of the largest in the world, and you can see the benefit of that as we can make a difference in Ukraine and support our allies there. So what I'm delighted is that other economies and other countries are also now fulfilling or planning to fulfill their NATO obligations of spending 2% of their GDP on defence. That's something that we've done for years when the vast majority of other countries have not. So actually it's a good thing for our collective security that other countries are catching up to where we have been and continue to lead.
And when the Defence Secretary says it still doesn't catch up to the new threat that's posed by Russia, your answer is no, I did it all last year.
I think the Defence Secretary and indeed the Prime Minister have been very clear that the significant uplift in funding that we've put into defence is historic and ensures that we remain a very significant spender on defence, not just today but in the years to come, and can continue to play a leading role supporting our allies and ensuring the security of our country. Now, defence is one of the many challenges that the government has. Defence was fortunate actually to get a settlement before everyone else and a very generous one. Whether it's funding the NHS to help with the backlogs, support people with the cost of living now, there's many things across government that we also need to get on with, and that's why I'm pleased that we took care of defence early and they have the certainty of long-term planning and are able to, as I said, put that into practice as we're seeing to support Ukraine right now. Well,
of course, one of the reasons why a big trade war with Europe would be the worst possible timing is the cost of living crisis, which I know you've been talking about a lot over the last few weeks. Our economists estimate that the cost of living squeeze altogether is going to cost the average family well over £2,100 this year. You've got, as a result, real disposable income falling by 4%. We're also expecting to see the economy shrink in the second and fourth quarter. We've already saw today it started to shrink in March. I mean, do you look back now and wish that you had got more ahead of this crisis in the spring statement rather than yet again having to rush out some emergency medicine under pressure from the rest of the government?
No, I think it's important that the policy remains responsive to the situation that we're seeing. And in the spring and in February, we had a sense of what was happening. Particular, we had clarity on energy prices because the price cap was increased in April by about £700. And we announced in advance of that the support that was going to accompany that increase. And it's worth about £350 for a typical household. It's about half the increase. And then on top of that...
But overall, I've just said it's 2,000, so that doesn't feel responsive.
Well, that's just one aspect of what we're doing. And if you look what's happening in a few weeks' time, for example, there's a very significant tax cut coming in for 30 million people in work that's worth £6 billion.
After a quite significant tax rise.
Well, it means that most people in work, the vast majority, 70% of them, will see a net tax cut. In fact, it's worth £330. The combination of our fuel duty freeze and fuel duty tax cut, the largest ever cut to fuel duty, that's worth another £100 for a typical family. In the autumn, in advance, we improved the generosity of our universal credit system to help people as they move into work from welfare. That particularly supports low-income families. And again, that's worth £1,000 for a typical person benefiting. The national living wage has just gone up a few weeks ago. Again, that's worth about £1,000 a year to someone working full-time on the national living wage. So you put all these things together, there's quite a lot of support in place. But I've always said I'd stand ready to do more as the situation evolves, particularly with energy prices, where the price cap will most likely go up again in the autumn. And I'm focused now on, I'm out and about across the country, listening to people, hearing what's on their mind, what they're worried about, to make sure that we can get our policy right. And that's the thing that I'm focused on now doing.
There's one thing, and of course, you've mentioned a lot of the measures actually were to help working families, but there's a big hit for anyone who's reliant on state benefits. And that's a very simple thing that could have been done that actually would have been cost neutral, would have been to spread the uprating across 2 years. So instead of getting a well below inflation increase in benefits this year and what will probably be a well above inflation increase next year, you could have spread it over 2 years. And I know there may have been some technical problems with that, but have you worked out how to do that yet? Because it obviously could make a big difference.
Well, actually, there are quite, the technical problems, that sounds like an excuse, but the operation of our welfare system is actually technically complicated, and it's not necessarily possible to do that for everybody. And actually, many of the systems are built in a way that can only be done once a year, and the decision was taken quite a while ago. Before,
but you managed to put the furlough. You designed the furlough scheme for most of the UK populated working force for a few weeks.
The welfare system works in a very different way, and we're constrained somewhat by the operation of the welfare system, so it can't be done for everybody in that way. But we are still supporting people. So, for example, we very much strengthened the incentives to work, the rewards for work through the national living wage and the universal credit taper rate, for example. Now, the majority of people on universal credit, for example, either are in work or are able to work and are looking for work. So the policies that we've put in place really help them, and sustainably that is the best way to help with the cost of living, is to get people into a job that pays well and support them in doing so, whether it's with skills or work support. So we are focused on that. But look, I recognise there's always going to be families in a particular circumstance that it's, I can't particularly forecast sitting at a desk in the Treasury, and that's why we've given councils before and now up to £1 billion of discretionary funding, because the local councils are best placed to know those very vulnerable families who, for whatever reason, aren't quite getting the help they need. So those councils now have the funding that they can provide direct support to those families, a little bit extra as well.
And you talked about councils. We've done a very careful look at what's happened on the levelling up agenda across the country since 2019, everything that we can get on the very latest, because obviously most of the time you have got rather old data, but the things that go right up mostly to the spring of this year, the gap between London and South East and everywhere else is growing on every measure except life expectancy and the number of people on benefits, and that's only because London has levelled down. Those things have got worse in London. Here, salaries, on average, monthly salaries, have fallen behind the London and South East by another £300. I mean, it's an impossible task that you've been landed with, this levelling up agenda, and you're not. It doesn't feel like the government's really putting the money and the effort in to make a difference on any of these measures.
So I haven't seen your report yet, so forgive me for not having sight of exactly the figures. They're slightly different to the figures that I'd looked at previously, where what you saw was a much stronger recovery in jobs and wages outside of London and the South East. So I'd be interested to have a look at your report. Yeah, I think in general, the period that you're describing is obviously the period of the pandemic. And so it's been a challenging time for the economy. But that said, we are very committed to levelling up. What does it mean to me? It means making sure people, wherever they happen to grow up and live in the UK, feel that they've got fantastic opportunity ahead of them, and that they also have enormous pride in the place where they get to call home. We're sitting here in Stoke, which has received a huge amount of investment in the town here, or the cities here, or the collection of towns, and also investment in the transport infrastructure. And I've been here multiple times to visit local businesses in the community, and actually there's an enormous sense of positivity and optimism here about what's happening. And similarly in Teesside, where... That
wasn't really what we saw in the council at the local recent elections. Lots of optimism and positivity.
Well, look, there's a mixed picture across the country, depending on where you were, and remember a government that's mid-term and things, of course, are challenging. So I don't think it was an obvious answer one way or another. But let's take a place like Teesside, which I know well. It's near where my constituency is. That's a place that just 5 years or so ago, thousands of people lost their jobs when a steel plant closed. And look at that area now. What does levelling up mean there? Well, it means a new Freeport, which we've created after leaving the EU, which is attracting jobs and investment. And you're seeing that in Freeports across the country, whether it's GE or Siemens investing in offshore wind. You're seeing new jobs in hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, these industries of the future, vaccine manufacturing. You've got a new Treasury campus open in Darlington, which is flourishing and has really cut through to the community about how seriously we take this project. And you've got revitalised town centres and high streets in Middlesbrough and Stockton and Thornaby and Darlington, and new transport infrastructure. And the Darlington train station is getting an enormous upgrade.
What we find that is the things that you control, the transport spending, the public service spending, has all grown faster in London South East.
I'm going to have to see your numbers, because one thing this government is doing is actually being generous with the amount of investment in public services and also in infrastructure. So whether it's the integrated rail plan, which will speed up journey times across the north, east, west, whether it's the half a dozen cities around the UK which are receiving London-style, TfL-style transport settlements to ensure that we can connect within the cities really well. We know that makes a difference to economic productivity, whether it's investing in safer streets and police officers. All of that is happening considerably more outside of London from where I'm sitting, but as I said, I'll have a look at the report.
Yeah, we're going to run out of time. We're Bloomberg, so we're very focused on the financial services,
Yes.
on the city. You had a fantastic career in the city. You've also been in high office for several years. It's very easy to lose track of how the rest of the world sees things. And I have to ask you, it's been a few weeks since the story broke, do you have a better understanding now of why even your supporters found it extraordinary that your family was organising its tax affairs to limit UK tax?
So look, my wife's her own person. She's an independent businesswoman. She's made a statement. My wife is, I don't think people would find it extraordinary if she was my property. I wouldn't presume to dictate to my wife to tell her what to do. She's an independent business person and she's always followed all the rules. She's paid taxes in the UK on her UK earnings and international taxes on her international earnings, very much within the rules. But she recognised that there was a call to go beyond the rules, and she made that decision herself to pay both UK and foreign taxes on her international
As Chancellor, you didn't think it was extraordinary. You didn't think it was extraordinary. I guess because I just wonder whether you often talk about being a good husband and being a good citizen. Do you think being a good citizen, a good husband, a good leader is only about sticking to the rules and doing what's legal?
No, but I do think about part of being a good husband is not presuming to dictate to my wife what to do, because she's an independent person and I support her decisions.